Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at a BBC report that discusses the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine and also the grain being taken from Ukraine. Let's get into it.
Ukrainian officials are warning that the situation at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station is approaching critical. Emergency workers have been staging drills and practicing cleaning operations in the event of radioactive contamination. Russia took control of the nuclear plant, which is the biggest in Europe, in early March. And there's recently been...
Okay, her opening statement, there's problems there. Yes, of course, I totally agree with that. And it is the biggest in Europe. Yes, correct. Up to now, the report has been 100% accurate. Let's move on.
Been heavy shelling at and around the site, with both sides blaming each other for the attacks. Our correspondent James Waterhouse reports.
Ukraine's vast, rich landscape, full of produce, industry, but still under threat. We're being taken to see preparations for a worst-case scenario.
If you want to get anywhere quickly these days, this is how you do it. We are travelling very low to stay out of range of Russian missiles and aircraft. And you get a real sense of just how vast this country is.
In Zaporizhzhia, they're training for a crisis which some fear could be more serious than the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the worst ever. The region's power plant further south has been under Russian control since early March, and officials...
Okay, the next part of it. Yes, she mentioned that both sides, both the Russians and the Ukrainians, are claiming that each other is shelling the plant. Absolutely. No doubt about that. We then move on to the correspondent on the site, who's flying in a helicopter to Zaporizhzhia, where he's been taken, and you've got to look at this from a perspective of a journalist. He's been taken for a photo shoot. It's a controlled staged event for Western media. That's what it is. And you'll notice that there is lots and lots of media there taking lots and lots of pictures to send back to their media organizations. Just now, what I want you to do is just have a look in the background, not at the men in the yellow suits, but all the people around the men in the yellow suits.
In Zaporizhzhia,
You can see
a crisis which some fear could be more serious than the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the worst ever. The region's power plant further
there we go.
south
There's
has
more
been under Russian
cameramen.
control since early March, and officials say
And more at the back there.
is approaching critical.
It's changed dramatically.
And now we've got Ukrainian energy minister. Of course, he's going to be pro-Ukrainian. He's not going to say anything bad against Ukraine. Let's now just have a look at what we're talking, because a lot of people don't know really what's going on there at the moment. So first of all, we have a map. Bear with me. All right, this is a map. There is Zaporizhzhia. And then the actual power plant is here in this little town here, which is a fair distance away from Zaporizhzhia. Now, if we look at, now this is a Ukrainian site. So it's not a Russian site, it's a Ukrainian site, which has the maps. Now, there is Russian ones, and I could have shown you a Russian one, but I wanted to be as open and transparent as possible. And this is a Ukrainian-based site. Now, they're showing this, all this red is Russian-held territory. There's the power plant here. There's Zaporizhzhia there. This is all Ukrainian land. So if we zoom out just for a second, so you can see there's all the Russian-held territory, and there's all the Ukrainian-held territory. So now you have a bit of an understanding of where this location is, who's holding what. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming the Russians are shelling this power plant, which is situated right here, right? The Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are shelling it from over there. There is also an argument, and we'll get into that, and we spoke about it yesterday, which was that the Russians are using the plant to store weapons and have artillery, etc., missile systems and everything there. So, and they're trying to force the Ukrainians to fire there. Well, first of all, no one can force you to fire at anything. But let's get back into our discussion.
We are concerned. That's why we are here. That's why we created this group.
That's why we've created this group. So he's created this group for his narrative.
Why we are involved in everyday communication with this.
It's impossible to ensure the safety of the nuclear power plant while the Russian occupying forces are there.
There we go. While the Russian occupying forces are there. In other words, Russia, get out. Now, this is a war. No matter which way you want to look at it, special operations, whatever you want to call it. But they're not going to leave the plant. That's on that side of the river. So they need to deal with it. And to deal with it is not to bomb it, if they are. And we'll get to that soon. So at the moment, we've got this staged event in Zaporizhzhia. Now, I say it's staged because what is 3 or 4 men in yellow suits going to do if a shell or a missile hits a reactor? And mind you, the reactor, again, is nowhere near Zaporizhzhia, which is here. It's down here. Now, we're looking at 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, 70 kilometers away from there. What are they going to do in an emergency situation if something hits there? That's why it's a staged event. All right, so let's get back to it.
This is the key concern that we all need to clearly understand.
There are growing concerns that Russia has been using it as a military base.
Okay, that Russia's been using it as a military base. Right, we saw that yesterday. We did a report. Someone, if you'd like to, you can go back and have a look at our CNN report we did on, our critique on CNN, where they showed what looked like an orange dump truck that they hit inside the nuclear power plant. And that was right inside the nuclear power plant in like a sprinkler system. For what? I'm not sure. I'm not a nuclear physicist, so I can't tell you. But also, the only other thing they showed was they dropped the Ukrainians, and this was a Ukrainian site showing that they dropped it was a drone. They had done a drone attack on some tents that were set up for soldiers at the facility that were looking after the facility. Interesting that they keep claiming that Russia is using it for this, but they give no evidence except a truck driving in. And a dump truck sitting in between some sprinklers, an orange dump truck. It wasn't a grad as they claimed it was. So let's move on.
The city of Yehuda, where the plant is, has seen recent heavy shelling. Both Ukraine and Russia blame each other. Elena has just escaped from there with her children and just wanted to get out.
There has been many more explosions, and it became much more dangerous to stay there. I didn't want to leave home, but when it became unbearable, I had no other choice.
Okay, now they got this lady. Now she lived in this. She's come from this little town, and let's just zoom in. She's come from this little town here, which is where the plant is. So if we just go in a little bit further, we're going to go in. So she's come from this town where the plant is actually over here. We'll do a little bit of a satellite look. So there's the plant, and then all the people that work at the plant and live around the plant live in this town here. this town here, which is about, if we look at it, 500, probably 2 kilometers from the plant, 3 kilometers. They're the reactors here, the 6 reactors. So she comes from here. Now, she admits, and we just have to use logic here, she admits that there was shelling of her town. Now, let's have a look at the Ukrainian side. Her town is held by the Russians. The whole side of this is held by the Russians. So logic tells you who's shelling it? The Ukrainians. It's not rocket science. So let's just get something straight. If you're going to start a narrative, then you've got to have evidence, and they're not giving any evidence. They're giving a lady who's fled here because she was being shelled. Now, Russia's held this since late February or early March, depending on who tells you. And I won't say it's late February, I won't say it's early March. It's one or the other, but around that time.
The NATO alliance is the latest voice to call for international inspectors to be let into the plant. With Ukraine unable to force the Russians out, it's instead preparing for the worst, if it happens. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Zaporizhzhia.
All right, this part of the article has been about fear. What it is, it's journalism being used as a tool for fear, to make everyone fearful that what's going to happen. This is a sensationalized event. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. They could stop it tomorrow if they didn't shell the plant. If Ukraine stopped shelling, then it wouldn't be a problem. And we'll get to that in a minute.
Let's talk to our correspondent Hugo Bachega in Kiev. Hugo, how clear is the picture of what is going on at the nuclear plant with all those Russian forces around it?
Very nice how she sets the question up. All those Russian forces are in it. Well, yeah, they're on that side of the river. The other side is full of all those Ukrainian forces. So, it's the way they use the language, and it sows fear into people. That's the idea of it.
Yeah, Karen, for days we've been talking about tensions around this nuclear facility, Russia and Ukraine trading accusations of who's to blame for shelling the complex.
Yep, and absolutely. Yep, they have been blaming each other. The only shelling that we've seen is the Ukrainian footage where they quite proudly show off the kamikaze drones hitting the plant. Even though they were saying it didn't hit the plant, it was near the plant. But we've already proven in my last video that it was in the plant. So if you go back and have a look at that, you'll see the proof where the actual tents were and that they were inside the actual power plant.
The Ukrainians accuse Russian forces of essentially turning this nuclear facility into a military base, using it to launch attacks against Ukrainian targets, perhaps knowing that the Ukrainians are unlikely to retaliate. Now, the Russians reject those accusations. They say Russian forces are there protecting the plant, but there have been some calls for international inspectors to be...
Okay, we'll just stop it there for a second. He says, and I just need to back this up for a fraction. He says that, now let me think.
Now, the Russians reject those accusations.
Yeah.
They say Russian forces are there protecting the plant, knowing that the Ukrainians are unlikely to retaliate.
Unlikely to retaliate. Last video, we showed it where the Ukrainians themselves admitted to the drone attacks which we ascertained were on the plant. So this reporter who's being paid, who's supposedly on the front lines, is being disingenuous. Instead of saying Ukraine has been doing drone attacks on there, however they claim they're not damaging the plant, be open and transparent, because you're just losing credibility.
Now, the Russians reject those accusations.
Yeah, absolutely. They reject the accusations. And there's been no evidence on Ukrainian TV or on the Western media that shows Russians shelling the plant.
They say Russian forces are there protecting the plant, but there have been some calls for international inspectors to be allowed into this nuclear facility. And yesterday, during his evening address, President Zelensky said attempts are being made to send UN inspectors to the Zaporizhzhia complex. Now, it's not clear how that could happen because the Russians so far have not given any sign that they are willing to negotiate to allow international inspectors into this complex. Now,
okay, really? Okay, let's have a look. This was dated, and we just need to go down for a second. This is dated the 18th of August, this report. So let's now go and have a look. Now, this is first Russian media, right? I accept it's Russian media, but you've got to look at everywhere. So I'm looking at the Russian. The IAEA responded to shelling armed forces of Ukraine at shelling of the armed forces of Ukraine at Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Now, very short, this was the 6th. The International Atomic Energy Agency has responded to the shelling that the armed forces of Ukraine inflicted on the facility at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power. A new statement from the agency appeared at the disposal of RIA. According to the head of the IAEA, the agency is concerned about what's happening at the station at Zaporizhzhia. He noted that now, especially after the shelling of the nuclear plant by the armed forces of Ukraine, dangerous nuclear catastrophe is quite real. He acknowledges the danger the armed forces especially the shelling of the nuclear plant by the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, whether that's right or not, we'll take it with a grain of salt. But what I'm saying is they knew about it back on the 6th. Now, let's move on. This is American. Bloomberg's. Russia invites nuclear monitors to visit shelled Ukrainian plant. This is not Russia. This is not the Russian media. This is the American media. This is Bloomberg. Oh, 10 days before. Bear with me. 10 days before this report. Why isn't this bloke sacked? Because he's just got on national network on the BBC and lied. And we've caught him out again. More lies. But he's making Russia look bad. That's all this is about. This is just, again, a series of propaganda pushing fear into the heart of UK residents and anyone else who watches it. So that's what it is. Let's have a look. 11th, still, this is 6 days before that was released. This is the International Atomic Energy Agency. Hostilities at Zaporizhzhia must stop. The 11th. Right? He's basically saying, yeah, it's all got to stop. You got to stop bombing it, whoever's bombing it. He's not, now he won't say who's actually bombing it, but they knew about it on the 11th. Hang on a minute. They're saying it must stop, but Russia invited them to the plant. Now, the interesting thing here, I'm sure I saw it. Okay, it's a Ukrainian facility, so it requires Ukraine's agreement. I'm sorry. If everyone is correct in what everyone is saying, and we're on the verge of a catastrophe, and the International Atomic Energy Agency is waiting on the Ukrainians to give them approval. That's pretty stuffed up, isn't it? You know, if they're really concerned about the catastrophe, they would move mountains to get there. Why aren't they? They don't want to see what's happening. And while they're not there, whoever's still shelling it can continue to shell it. So you can continue to shell it while the inspectors are not there. Once the inspectors are there, you can't shell it because then the inspectors see it. So, you know, use some logic. This is the thing. This is what this channel's all about. It's about disseminating what's going on so that you don't have to. You can go and look at all these websites. They're all here. You can see them all, you know, or you can just watch the video. So that's where we're at with that. Bloomberg's admitted well before this bloke did his 8th, and we're looking at 10 days before. And this puppet is just saying what his masters want him to say. Because he's lying. Either he's lying or Bloomberg's is lying. One or the other. Let's keep moving.
Here today in Ukraine, Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, will be meeting President Zelensky, and I think what is happening at the Zaporizhzhia complex will be at the top of the agenda when they meet later today.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the potential for something really serious to happen at Zaporizhzhia with all this military activity around it must be right up there at the top of his concerns. What else are we expecting from Antonio Guterres' meeting with President Erdogan of Turkey and President Zelensky of Ukraine?
Yeah, apart from what is happening at the Zaporizhzhia complex, they will be discussing the grain deal. Mr. Guterres was heavily involved in negotiating the details of this deal that allowed Ukraine to resume its grain exports. Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters of grain, and the Russian blockade created a global food crisis. So the United Nations...
Okay. So the Russian blockade created a global food crisis. That's what we're all told. Let's have a look at that. Now, this is the stats for 2020, and this is the latest data that we have. Anyone can go there. This is from the OEC. Now, here is the exporters of wheat in 2020 by country. We see that Russia is 19.5% and Ukraine is 9%. Now, that's still a decent number. But it's, if we're having a global food crisis because Ukraine can't, and they are getting some of it out. We've seen the images of trucks going into the EU with grain, and there's now been some ships left and taken grain out. So say 1% has gone out. So we're down to 8% of the total. So of the world's exporters. Now these are the exporters. These are not the producers. These are the exporters. So they produce excess for the world and they export it. Now, what's really happening, and what they don't say, is the EU sanctions. The EU sanctions, which Russia means that Russia, who is the leading wheat exporter, cannot export its grain because ships can't go with Russian products into ports because of the EU sanctions and the Western sanctions. So if you add those two up, we end up with 28.5% of the total. That's more like it. Now, if you've lost 30% of the world's exporting of wheat, you've got a problem. But, you know, you could say that the special operations has caused a problem with the supply chain within Ukraine. And therefore, a lot of the wheat's not getting out of Ukraine. Correct. But it's in itself is not causing the global shortage of wheat. What's causing is that and amplified by the 19.5% that Russia produces, which is not allowed to be exported. Now, if the reporter is a reporter, he would say that, yes, the problem of Ukraine not being able to export or get their stuff out because of the special operation, or if he wants to call it a war, he can call it whatever he wants. But also us, as in the EU and the Western nations, who have put sanctions on Russia, not allowing them to export their wheat, is causing this. That's accurate. What he has done is again misled us. Let's go back to our article.
Nations and Turkey helped negotiate the deal. We understand that during those talks later, the leaders will be discussing the possibility of expanding this grain deal. So I think this will be an opportunity to celebrate a rare diplomatic breakthrough in this conflict.
For just 60
Okay, to conclude, they gave virtually there was no factual or evidence for their claims. It was just claims. All of it was claims. They had a staged event in Zaporizhzhia. Yes, she was correct in the beginning where she said that the power plant had been held by Russia since early March and February. Yes, she was correct, and both the other gentleman was correct who said that both sides have been bombing or accused each other of bombing the plant, right? The rest of it, there were so many inaccuracies, just sly side comments, which all they did was try and put a negative spin on Russia, and that's all it was. So today's video, I would have to say, the CNN one was a 1 out of 10. I'll give this actually a 4 out of 10 because there's some factual bits in there. The rest of it was just, it was again an exercise in propaganda and in trying to reaffirm the narrative that Russia is bad and Ukraine is good. So until next time, I hope you and your family stay safe and well, and I'll see you here again. Bye for now.